Hi, everybody. My name is Wesley and I'm an alcoholic. It's just good to be in Texas. You know, I have just become part of Texas. I'm in Texas 2 or 3 times a year, and I love it. When I used to come in Texas, I used to say that my sole ambition was to make Texas a little bigger. And how I do that is to just have one Texan to maintain his sobriety. Get a few ideas that I've learned along the road, the path in Alcoholics Anonymous. And if I can help any of you just one iota, well, I have made certainly contributed something to Texas and made it a little bigger. And this I hope I can do tonight, because I have something to talk to you about that really means something to me. It's as important to me as the blood in my veins, and that's the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. They say in Texas, as Pat says a while ago, I don't go through all that rigmarole because I don't know it, but they say if you don't give your sobriety date, you don't have one. Is that right? Well, my sobriety date is November the 13th, 1947. In other words, I've had the wonderful privilege of living this program. I'm in my 36th year. Now, my wife says I've been in AA 35. Well, I've completed 35, and I'm in my 36th. That sounds better, doesn't it, huh? I think so, too. I can't get rid of that ego. But anyway, what I am today or what I'll ever be, I owe to this program. When I came here, I had nothing left. I was solely qualified to be a member of this organization. And it was the last place I ever wanted to come. Is there anybody in this room wanting to become a member of Alcoholics Anonymous? No one? Well, that's unusual. That's the last thing I wanted to do, too, is become a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I would like to be out there and join in soft music, Mellow Lights, and Chanel No. 5, but I just can't do it anymore. And I haven't been able to do it for a long time because that aggravates my disease. And when my disease gets aggravated, there's no telling what's going to happen. And so therefore I have refrained from enjoying soft music, Mellow Lights, and Chanel No. 5 now for a long time. But I've got along fine without it. You know, the first thing I want to talk about tonight is this book, because I think this is the most important thing we have in Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I'm not a book salesman. I don't pretend to be a book salesman. But the first 164 pages of this book is the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the more that I live in Alcoholics Anonymous and study the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, the more I go back to this big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, for years, I didn't know how the big book was laid out. And my sponsor told me one day that he was just sick and tired of me playing around in Alcoholics Anonymous, that it was about time for me to get off of the detour and get on the path. And so I said, what do you mean? He says, well, he says how it works. It says, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. And he says, you've been in AA 5 years and you've never been on the path. He says, hell, you've been detoured. And I said, well, how do you get on the path? He says, you get on the path through the big book, through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, well, what the big book has to do with the 12 steps? He says, that's the only place that you can find the true interpretation of the 12 steps. And I said, well, I never heard that before. He says, well, that's exactly right, Wesley. He says, you've been in AA 5 years and you don't even know what the first step says. And I said, what are you talking about? I don't know what the first step says. He said, what does it say? I said that we admitted that we're powerless over alcohol and our lives have become unmanageable. He said, that's not what it says at all. I said, you must be kidding. He said, between the word alcohol and that, there's a dash. And he says, that dash is there for a reason. And he says, if you look it up in the dictionary, that punctuation mark will tell you that the subject is changing when you get to that dash. And there's 2 subjects in the first step. One about alcohol and the other one about your unmanageable life. He said, now say it like you're supposed to say it. And when you get to that dash, pause and let me know that you're changing the subject. And so I said, well, we admitted that we were powerless over alcohol. that our lives had become unmanageable. He says, I'll give you credit for the first half of the first step for 5 years. But he says, you've done nothing about your unmanageable life. You still lie, cheat, steal, dishonest, run around on your wife, and you're no good, and you're no good father. He says, I'm ashamed that you're even a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, I don't know what you're howling your horse about today, but I wish you'd get off of my back. He says, I'm just sick and tired of you messing around this program. I said, well, how do I get in the program? How do I get on the path? And he says, there's an old Chinaman once said that the first thing you do when you're going to start a journey, and that's what you're going to start when you go down that path, the first thing you have to do is take the first step. Anytime you start anywhere, you've got to take that first step. And he said, that's the same way it is in AA. But he said, now, before you take the step, Wesley, you've got to find out something about what you've got, what your trouble is. And he says, you'll find that out in the big book. He said, you know, in the first forward, in the first edition, it says that this book was written by 100 men and women. And this book was to tell you precisely, not suggestive, but precisely how they had recovered from alcoholism. And he says, so that's the path. If you follow the next 164 pages, including the not including the doctor's opinion, that's a little addition, well then, he says, you'll stay sober. And he says, the second thing you have to do, Wesley, is after you find that out, the next thing you have to do is find out what your program is. He says, you don't even know what your program is. I says, I sure do. I'm an alcoholic. He says, is that all you know? I said, well, I can take a drink and get drunk. He says, is that all you know? I said, yes. He says, well, you've never read the doctor's opinion then. He says, you better find out what your program is, because how can you work on a program when you don't even know what your program is? He says, that don't make sense, does it? I said, no, it doesn't. He said, well, if I were you, I would read the doctor's opinion and find out something about alcoholism. He said, that was the greatest piece of literature that's ever been written about alcoholism. And Dr. Silkworth tells us about alcoholism. He tells us precisely what we have and how to deal with it and what we have to do to arrest the disease. He knows it's incurable. We can arrest it, but we can never cure it. And he says, after you find out what your program is, then the next thing you have to do is identify with your program. And if you identify with your program, you've got to have something to identify with. When he said just by chance, the first chapter in the big book is Bill's story. And Bill's story is about a real alcoholic, a real alcoholic. He says, you read Bill's story and see if you identify with his actions as an alcoholic, with his life. See if your life parallels with him. He said, no, it ain't got it. You're a Georgia cracker. He says, it ain't got anything to do with him being a damn Yankee and you being a rebel. That doesn't have anything to do with it. We're talking about one thing, alcoholism. Whether he's a stockbroker or whether or you're an electrician. But you have one thing in common. You both have a common peril, and that common peril is alcoholism. And you have to identify with this through Bill's story. What is a real alcoholic? So there you got your program, there you got your identification. And after you've got those two things, the next thing you have to find out the solution to the problem. He said, and by chance, the next chapter of the big book, title is There Is a Solution. That's simple. That's going down the path. There is a solution. And that's a promise. There's no halfway measures. They say there is a solution. They don't say there may be a solution. There is a solution. And he says you will find out what your solution is to your problem through the chapters of there's solution, more about alcoholism and we agnostics. You'll take the first and second step down the path. And then it tells you how it works. And he said he told me that the original manuscript of the big book said after you read how it works, it said this right after the three pertinent ideas: A, that we're alcoholic and we cannot manage our own lives; B, that probably no human being can relieve us of alcoholism; and C, that God could and would if he was sought. He says right after that they had another statement, but they took it out of the big book, 9 print. It says this. It says, you have read the book up to this point, and if you don't believe what it says, then you just throw the damn thing away, because it ain't going to do you no good. That's what it says. And so then, right after that, it says, now, if you're ready to go farther, you're going to go into action into the program, and this is your first action step. It's the third step. You're going down the path. You're at the third step. And you go down the path a little farther, it says, now you're at the fourth step, the fifth step, the sixth step, the seventh step, the eighth step, the ninth step, the 10th step, the 11th step, the 12th step. It carries you right through the 12 steps. If you're not using the big book as an outline to go down the path, you're cheating yourself. You understand what I'm saying? This is the answer. Not one word has been changed. There's over 1 million, way over 1 million alcoholics come through Alcoholics Anonymous in the day sober and rehabilitated and put back in their useful places in their communities. And not one of them has been able to tear up the first 164 pages of this book. Isn't that solution enough for you? This book works if we work it. And this is how you go down the path. Thank God he taught me that. If I hadn't been taught that, I'd have never stayed sober no 35 years, because I didn't have what it takes. I'd have run out of gas. I'd have went back trying to stay sober on my self-knowledge. And the big book says you cannot stay sober on self-knowledge. The big book, Dr. Silkworth says you've got to go through a psychic change. Bill says you can't stay sober in self-knowledge. Dr. Jung says you've got to go through a spiritual experience to get rid of all of this. And so this is what I've been doing for 30 years now, after I found out where the path was. I've been trying to go down the path. And thank God I found that, because since that time I've been happy. And I think that's the reason I'm an alcoholic, is because I was born with a personality that just wanted to be happy. And I was made on Friday afternoon about 5 o'clock, and everybody wanted to get home on the assembly line, and they just didn't tighten up all the screws. And they left me dangling. And so I went for about 17 years with these loose screws, and I had a lot of them. And one day I drank some of this white lightning, and it just absolutely acted like a screwdriver, a wrench, or whatever is necessary to tighten up in me, and it just absolutely tightened up everything in me. And for the first time in my life, I was what I wanted to be. I wanted to be. I could dance. I was a lover boy, conversationalist, businessman. I was everything all wrapped in one when I started drinking that golden stuff. And I said to myself, if I'm going to be a success, I'm going to have to drink this stuff, because this is what I need to get rid of all of these inhibitions inside of me, these inferiority complexes and so forth. And I religiously did it then until I became fully addicted. And I lived to drink and I drank to live. I got sick and tired of being sick and tired. You know, I'll say this tonight. If castor oil would have had the same effect on me as alcohol, hell, I'd have been a castor oil. It wouldn't have made a bit of difference. Because I drank it for the effects. How many alcoholics in here drank alcohol for the effects of it? Hold up your hand. Look at that. See that? That's why we did it. Isn't that something? Well, anyway, one Sunday morning, I woke up all hungover, and I had made a big mistake. I had got so drunk on Saturday night that I forgot to buy half a pint to sober up on Sunday morning. Now that is a mistake if you're an alcoholic. Oh, I was hungover. And so I got busy thinking. I said, where can I get a drink this morning? We don't open the bar in Florida till 1 o'clock, and that's eternity, 1 o'clock. And I said, I've got to have a drink. And finally I figured old Shag was open. This is a bar across the tracks. And this was a bar I finished up on every day of my life. And I was a good friend to Shag. And Shag, on Sunday morning, always went down and cleaned up this old bar on Sunday morning. And so I walks up to the door, and I knocks on the door, and Shag says, who's that? And I says, Wesley. He says, what do you want? I says, I want a drink, Shag. He says, I can't sell it to you. I said, why not? I'm your friend, boy. He says, well, I'm not going to jeopardize my license just on account of our friendship. You come back at 1 o'clock, and I'll give you a drink. I said, Shag, I can't live till 1 o'clock. He said, well, go someplace else then. I'm sorry. And I said, Shag, you're not going to let me in there? He said, no, I'm not going to let you in here. I said, what are you doing in there? He says, I'm mopping the floor. I said, don't you need somebody to help you mop the floor? He said, you mean it? I says, I sure do. And I was standing right in front of that door. Now visualize this, because if you're an alcoholic, you know what I'm talking about with this now. I was standing in front of that bar. Now, this bar got cleaned up once a week. And it was on the other side of the tracks. And the bathroom doors are open. And the old stale beer bottles was around. That's before they had cans, you know. They didn't have them these luscious aluminum cans today. They had them old beer bottles, you know. And whiskey bottles and everything else, all mixed together. And hot. Oh, it was hot. It was 110 inside of that building. And Shag opened that door. And when he did, that whole thing just hit me right in the face. That was the sweetest smell I ever smelled. Just a sigh of relief. I'm home. I'm going to get well. You know what I'm talking about? I'm going to get well. I knew I was going to get well. And he's setting me up a fifth of Carstairs white seal. You know, had that little white seal on it. And a pitcher of water. And I had my first drink. And I grabbed that mop. And me and Shag cleaned that joint up. And then it came time to socialize. And Shag had heard some good jokes, and he was telling me those jokes, and we was laughing, you know, and just having a good time. And all of a sudden I just happened to think of my wife. She was home. She'd been home all week all by herself. I'd been working hard for her that week. I'd been drunk all week, but I forgot about that. But I'd been working hard for her that week, and I hadn't paid much attention to her. So I was going home Sunday afternoon, you know, and see if I can, you know, renew my acquaintances. I see that happens in Texas too. And so I went home in good spirits. Oh, beautiful spirits. And I got me 2 more bottles of spirits just to be sure. And I walks up the stairs in this little old sardine can apartment, and I opened the door. And you know what she had the audacity to say to me? Where have you been? And really rough, too. I says, where have I been? I've been out looking at the jobs that I'm supposed to do next week for you and your children, so you'll have a roof over your head, clothes on your back, and food on your table. That's where I've been. She says, you've been drinking. I've had a couple of bottles of beer. She says, Wesley, what are we going to do about your drinking? I said, what are we going to do about my drinking? We're not going to do anything about my drinking. You're the most unappreciative human being I ever knew. I work my fingers to the bone for you and your children every week. And I come, and on Sunday morning, I have a couple of hours that I can go out and do the few things that I like to do. And I come home here, and you start yelling at me. Oh, Rena, when are you going to start appreciating me? Well, she had 4 letter words to say. I'm not going to say them, man, don't worry. And she just turned around and walked out. You can't talk to a drunk. Well, I took a couple of more drinks, and I thought of her again. You know, I couldn't get her off my mind. I was a lover boy when I drank. And so I happened to think of those stories Shag told me. You know, they're a little off color. They wasn't bad, but, you know, they wasn't clean either. And so I go downstairs to tell her these jokes to kind of cheer her up a little, you know. And when I opened my mouth and told her one of those jokes, she says, I don't want to hear no more of that filth. I want to know what we're going to do about your drinking. And I just sat down because I had nothing else to say to her. Now, we'd been married 12 years. We had two lovely children, a boy and a girl, and two lovely children, and she was a lovely person, a good wife. And I had gave her a hard time for 12 years. But of course, I didn't think so, you know. And so I just sit there because I didn't have anything to talk to her about. We had nothing in common. Have you ever been that way? Just sit there. And I was drunk, and so all I could think of was those two fists upstairs, you know, those two bottles. That's all I could get my mind on, and I said, well, if I raise off of this chair, all hell's going to break loose again. Is it worth it? I asked myself that question one time, is it worth it? And those butterflies just kept getting bigger. And finally I said, yeah, it's worth it. And so I got up to go upstairs to get a drink, and I looked across the hedge between that split the property of the neighbors, and there was a man up there knocking on the door. And I recognized him. He was a tile setter, and I was an electrician, and we'd worked on jobs together, and we drank together. And I said, I'll get old Jim over here in my yard. And Jim and I'll have a couple of drinks, and we'll have a lot of intellectual conversation out here, and maybe this will cheer her up, you know? You know, us drunks, we are fast like that, you know, cunning. And so Jim started walking toward me, and he got through the hedge. It was a hole in the hedge, and when he got through the hedge, I yelled at him. I said, Jim, how about a drink? And he says, Wesley, I'm sorry, I don't drink anymore. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't even know what the hell he was talking about. Now, in 1947, if you had a drunk in your house, you kept him locked up, you know. You didn't let society know that, you know. And he was the only one in Pompano Beach. Pompano Beach at that time was 5,000. Today it's 300,000 people. And so he come on over and sit down. He had been in AA 4 months, and he had never been able to carry the story. He had never been able to 12-step anybody. He never had the opportunity. Well, here it was Sunday afternoon, and he had somebody who was interested in my wife, Rena, because she immediately, she started asking him questions, you know. What is that? And, oh, that was all it needed. And he just unloaded. He stayed there for 3 hours. I'd run upstairs and take a drink, keep on the globe, come back downstairs, and he'd still be talking. She'd rest him for a minute, then he'd take off again. Well, finally he left. Well, I went ahead and got drunk, finished off one of those fists, most likely, or more than a fifth. Next morning, woke up the same way, looking in the mirror and said, Wesley, if you take a drink today, I hope God strikes you dead, and sincerely meant it. But you see, I was addicted, fully addicted. I didn't know how to go out and start the day without a drink. I had to start my day. And I couldn't go out and face what I had to do that day unless I was drunk. There's no other way. It was just as important to me as the blood in my veins. And so I had no other choice. Now, a non-alcoholic don't understand that, but an alcoholic understands it. This phenomenal craving in my stomach was so severe, I had to have a drink. My body would say to my mind, don't put no more of that stuff in me, please don't. And my mind would say, to hell with you, I'm going to put it in there anyway. And I'd just get sicker and sicker and sicker. Have y'all been in that same condition? Us Florida drunks get in that condition. And so I got drunk Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And Wednesday night I went to see Jim. And Jim come outside and we was talking. And I said, Jim, when can I go to an AA meeting with you, an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting with you? And he said, Wesley, you can go tomorrow night if you're sober. He qualified it. You see, Jim did the greatest thing on earth for me. He planted a seed in my mind that there was a way out. He planted a seed right up here that there was a way out. And that's all a 12-step call is. And that's all a 12-step call is today, is to plant a seed. That's your responsibility, to plant AA seeds everywhere. Whether they germinate or not, that's none of my business, and that's none of your business if you're an alcoholic anonymous. That's God's business. We can't force this down nobody's throat no more than somebody could force it down our throats. And so Jim planted this seed. I never asked Jim whether he knew I was an alcoholic or not. And I don't think Jim knew whether I was an alcoholic or not. I never have asked him. I'll get rid of him in a hurry because today I'm his sponsor. He had a little trouble along the line. He took a sabbatical. But anyway, Jim says, you can go tomorrow night if you're sober. And so the next morning I must have woke up and said, God help me stay sober this day so I can go to the AA meeting with Jim tonight. And so I stayed sober, and I haven't had a drink since, through the grace of God, only through his grace. And I started off that day, and it's been one day at a time ever since then. I'm in no hurry. I've got the rest of my life to complete this program, and I'll take it one day at a time and do the best I can with it every day, and do what I can, as the program tells me to do, and plant as many seeds as I can plant along the way. And that's my business. So they carried me to the meeting that night, Jim did, and then back in those days, they sit you on the front row. And then they'd go back in the back room and talk about you. Because a pigeon back in them days was few and far between, I tell you. My wife tells me I was number 13 in Broward County. That's Fort Lauderdale's the county seat. And I would say today there's 10,000 AA members in Broward County. I don't know, 200 or 300 groups. I don't know how many groups. But that's how much it's grown since then. But I was number 13, she tells me. And I guess it was 10 or 12 there that night when they all got there at the meeting. But they went in the back and they talked about it. And this guy come out and he opened the meeting as usual and went through the rituals. And then he started off. He says, you know, coming into AA is like coming up to a railroad crossing. It says three things. It says stop, look, and listen. Now, if there's any new members here tonight, that's awful important to remember those three things. Stop, look, and listen. The first thing you have to do is stop drinking, he said. Now, this is what he told me. He says, you have to stop drinking. Well, this is number 2 tells me this. He just told me that Alcoholics Anonymous was a non-drinking society, a fellowship. You know, and if you want to belong to it, you just don't drink. That's all. And I believed him. And I wanted to be part of it. Because those 12 people was chattering just like you were before this meeting started. You know, that AA chatter, you can't beat it. You just can't beat it. That's the joy I have coming to AA, is just hear that chatter. Because you know there's love and understanding. And so he said the next thing you have to do after you stop drinking is you've got to look around and see what this program is doing for other people. You've got to believe what you see. Have to believe it. And you can have exactly what you see in these people. But the first thing you have to do is learn how to listen. Listen. And he qualified me, and he was very abrupt. He says, the trouble with a new member coming in Alcoholics Anonymous, he may not know this, but he is malnutritious between the ears. Now, that's what they said in 1947. I don't know what to say today. But that's what he said. And the big book says you cannot stay sober with yourself knowledge, so I guess it's still running today, the same thing. You know nothing about living. If you knew something about living, you wouldn't be qualified to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so he said that if you want what we have, you have to listen to us. Something you haven't done in a long time. No, I hadn't listened to nobody in a long time. You know why I hadn't listened? Because everybody was trying to take away from me the rights and privilege to drink alcohol. And I didn't like it. What are we going to do about your drinking? They ain't going to do nothing about my drinking. My wife used to say to me worse things than that. She said, my God, why did I pick you out of the litter? I had 50 to pick from, and I got you. Why? My mother would say, why did God give me a son like you? Little Baptist preacher used to come see me. And he'd spend 10 minutes with me, and he'd ball up his fist, and he said, boy, you're going to hell. And I said, I'll meet you there. You know? And the people I work for said, now let me tell you something, boy, let me tell you something. When you get through with this job, don't you ever put your foot on my property again. Life's too short to mess around with a drunk like you. God, I don't like people to talk to me like that. Well, hell, I had a shell around me nobody could penetrate. Did you? I would say something to me just like pouring water on a duck. I didn't listen to nobody. And he told me if I wanted to stay sober, I had to listen. He said, you just show me an AA member that'll listen, and I'll show you one that'll stay sober. You show me one that won't listen, and I'll show you one that won't stay sober. It's just that simple. And it's that way in 1983. It's the same thing today. Today, I know that you cannot have a belligerent feeling when you come in this program. You've got to get rid of them. If you have any belligerency against anybody, and if you're an alcoholic, it's got to go. It's got to go. Because you cannot let this AA program will not go inside if you have a belligerent feeling. It'll absolutely escape you. Because you have to open up and let the sunlight of the Spirit come in. And how you start that sunlight of the Spirit coming in is by listening to what other people have to say. And start cracking and chiseling away this granite that you've got around you. That you will listen to other people. And you've got to get rid of all of this belligerency, contempt about other things or what people have done to you. Just think about what you've done to other people. You become willing to make amends for what you've done to other people, and regardless of whether people want to make amends to you or not. All of this is a change of attitude. And you get this change of attitude, and you will find the value of it just by learning to listen to what other people have to say. See, we've come along the same road that you're coming along right now, and we know what we had to do. And we have to tell you what you have to do. And the first thing you have to do is learn to listen. Get in your bedroom and sit down and squat and learn how to listen. See? And be sure you know how. Just listen, you know. Go outside, listen to the birds sing. But listen. It's amazing what you'll hear. Listen to the wind blow in the trees. Just listen to the sounds. And learn to listen. Be a good listener. And you'll make it in that age, but that's the only way you'll make it. Because you've got to change what you've got up here between the ears. Because what you've got up here between the ears is what brought you into Alcoholics Anonymous. And nobody wanted to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, so if you want to be a good member of Alcoholics Anonymous and be a success here, that's got to go. And you've got to go through a psychic change. You've got to make a 180-degree turn in your way of thinking. And this is what he told me. And thank God he told me that, because I have learned to listen. I don't have a shell. I'm still teachable. I'm still teachable. And I will always be teachable, because I've got so much to learn about this program. And the program had went on and on and on, giving me all of these wonderful things, and I picked up another sponsor. And this sponsor was very, very good to me, because he had sons my age, and he wanted to transmit what he knew about this program to me. And he'd stand on the street corners after the meeting at nights, and he would just tell me about this program. And the greatest thing he taught me was this, that if you're an alcoholic, you've got to make that decision. Nobody can make that decision for you. You have to make that decision. You have to identify with your problem. And if you're an alcoholic, you've got to make staying sober your biggest business for the rest of your life, day by day. It's got to be the most important thing in your life. It's got to be number one. Number one. Because without you being sober, it's got to come before your family, it's got to come before your job, it's got to come before your business, it's got to come before your boyfriend, it's got to come before society. Because without your sobriety, you don't have a family. Without your sobriety, you don't have a job or business. Without you being sober, you don't have a boyfriend. And without you being sober, society wants nothing to do with you if you're an alcoholic. You have to buy that. And so therefore, number one thing, everything in Alcoholics Anonymous starts from one. From one. One thing, and that's the common denominator. And the common denominator is stay sober for one day. Don't take one drink for one day. And that's it. Regardless of anything else. It has to be your biggest business, the most important thing you do every day. You know, one time, there was one Alcoholics Anonymous member in the state of Texas. His name was Joel, I believe. Was that right? Joel, I think was his name. I know his son. And from Joel, I come another one, and another one, another one. Everything starts from one. One time, there was only one AA member, and that was Bill Wilson. Then he found Dr. Bob, the other co-founder. That's two. Then he found Bill Dodson. That's three. One time, there was only one member in the state of Florida. His name was Tom Sharp. Today, there's 25 or 30,000 in the state of Florida. See, everything in AA starts from one. And your sobriety starts from one. Just keeps one person sober. If you can count to one, you can make this program. Now, can anyone in here not count to one? Don't take one drink for one day and keep one person sober. Now, how about that? That's simple, isn't it? And Dr. Bob says keep it simple. So if you can count to one, you can make the program. Regardless. You have got to have the same enthusiasm for staying sober that you had for getting drunk. Same enthusiasm, just in reverse. And it works. I'm an example for it. I'm standing up in front of you. If this program is done for me, this big book here gives me 100 promises in writing, and I've received every one of them in my 35 years. There's nothing on the face of the earth today that I can't have if I want it. I've got what it takes to get it, because I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I have a God of my understanding that I love, and he loves me. But still, I need the program more today than I ever needed it before in my life. I need it a lot more than I needed the first day I came into AA, because when I came to AA, I didn't have nothing to lose. Today, I've got everything to lose. I'm still one drink from a drunk. I know that. And so when I woke up this morning, I made my contract that when I lay my head on the pillow tonight, I'm going to be sober. Just be sober, through the grace of God. Make it my biggest business. My sponsor heard that I was playing knock rummy in a pool room, barroom combination thing in Pompano Beach, and he didn't believe his fair-haired boy would do a thing like that. So he rode up to Pompano Beach one day to just check me out, and he found me in there playing rummy. And he walks into this barroom, and he says, "I'd like to talk to you." I said, "As soon as I get through with this hand." So as soon as I got through with the hand, I went on out and sit in his car with him, and he said, "What the hell are you doing in there?" I says, "You blind? I was playing rummy." He says, "Well, you know you ain't got no business in there." I said, "I was playing rummy," and I blowed my breath in his face, and I said, "You see, I'm not drinking, don't you? You can't smell none on my breath." And he said, "I give you credit for better sense than that." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "You know, it's not a person in there gives a toot whether you're sober or not. Matter of fact, they'd like to see you drunk." He says, "You've been sober now for 7, 8 months or 4 months or whatever time it was." And he says, "Everybody in town knows it, that you're a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, you're not drinking anymore. And they're using you for an example. Those men are walking in their homes at night and with a half bag on, and their wives are saying to you, 'Why don't you go talk to Wesley Parrish and be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous?' Yeah, they hate your guts." And he says, "The first thing you know, somebody's going to suck you and make you thin." And then you're going to come down here to Fort Lauderdale and going to cry on my shoulder, and I'm just going to turn my back on you. Because he says, you've got no business in there. He says, you better start associating with the people that's trying to do the same thing you're trying to do. Stay sober. Just stay sober. And he says, these people will take care of you, Wesley. These people love you, and they want to help you. And he says, what you're doing now, you're just fixing somebody to slip you and make you thin. And he says, I hate to see it. Well, you know, I have never been in a bar or any place like that since. And I have been very close to members of Alcoholics Anonymous since then, because I realized the value of what he was trying to tell me, that I had better change my environment. Those old friends had to go because they was old drinking friends. And they didn't want to quit drinking. No, I was a matter of fact, I was a hindrance to their lives. In other words, I was a sore spot because their wives were bringing them up to me all the time. A lot of them used to call me and say, why don't you, Wesley, come over and talk to Joe a little? Says, he's drinking too much. I said, I'll be right over. You know, I thought I had the answer. And I appreciate this because these are the things what I got started on. Well, you know, the first 4 or 5 months in AA, I would not let my wife have anything to do with the program because I felt like, well, I'm going to go along for 2 or 3 years for this thing. I listen to these drunks or these drunken logs. I'm not as sick as those people. And after 2 or 3 years, I'm going to be able to go out and snitch a few and nobody'd ever know it. So if I said anything to her about it, well, she'll smell it on my breath and she'll make some smart-ass remark about it and call up my sponsor or something. And I said, I'm just not going to say nothing to her about it. I'm going to keep her ignorant about it. And so I didn't say a word to her about it for 4 or 5 months. And I walks in the house one day, and she says, you know, Wesley, I'm awful proud of you. And I said, what are you proud of me about? She says, you've been sober 4 months. I said, let me tell you one thing. That's my damn business, and you keep your nose out of it. Oh, I resented that. You know, she was putting her nose where it had no business, you know. But, you know, an alcoholic is cunning. A week went by, and I started watching her. And you know, she was still saying 4-letter words around my children. And my children. My children. And I was horrified. They were going to raise up to be nothing but a bunch of brats. Street kids saying those nasty words. You know, I was getting sanctimonious. And she was still looked haggard, you know. She was not well kept. She looked just like she did when I was drinking. No self-improvement at all. She'd work over that scrub board, you know, after 4 automatic washes. She had a scrub board in the number 3 tub. I know a lot of you ladies know what that was. She'd wash those clothes on Monday, and she looked like the wrath of hell, you know, and I'd come home. And nothing enticing about her, you know. And so I made the mistake of a lifetime. I started 12-stepping my wife. Now, that was the worst mistake I ever made. Oh, I took her to meetings. Oh, I carried her to meetings. And on our way home, I'd tell her what the drunks had to say and why they said it and all, interpret it for her, you know, like she didn't know what I was talking about. Well, everything went along fine. And of course, I kept the pressure on her. You know what I mean? She would treat me, if she would say anything to me, I'd say, out of the way, I'd say, you're rocking the boat. I said, if you don't stop it, you're going to aggravate the hell out of my disease. All such stuff that just kept screwing her down, you know, keeping her tight rein, you know. When I come home, that was my castle. That's one place I had full control. And I came home one day, and she was about a year in that age, she was crying. And I said, what's wrong with you? She says, I got palpitations of the heart. I says, it ain't but one thing wrong with you. I take you to these AA meetings. They talk about these 12 steps, but you're not living these 12 steps. That's what your trouble is. Why don't you get with the AA program? You don't see me with any palpitations to your heart, do you? And I'm supposed to be the sick one. And I'd come home the next day and she's crying. Palpitation of the heart. Finally, I carried her to the hospital. And they put her through the rigmarole, you know. And finally, after 3 or 4 days, they couldn't find anything wrong with her. So a smart doctor come along. And he said, I want to talk to you. And so he carried her underneath the palm trees and set her down on the grass and said, now, what's your trouble? And for the first time, this wonderful woman told the first person about me, what she had to put up with every day. And he says, I don't believe it. I'd run anybody up a wall. She says, well, that's what I have to put up with every day. He says, well, I'm going to prescribe one thing to you. He says, I'm not going to write it down, but I want you to brand it between your ears. I want you to go home this afternoon, and when you feel like giving that old man hell, give him hell. Well, she come home that afternoon, and she's fulfilled that prescription a jillion times since then. That doctor completely messed up my playpen. Boy, this woman started yelling at me, and I'd say, woman, don't yell at me, you aggravating my disease. And she'd yell back, she'd say, the hell with your disease. I said, don't say that. I'm a sick man. And she would just raise all kind of hell about anything, you know what I mean? Just speak her piece. Get it out from underneath here, you know. And finally, I had to go on the defense. And I had to start yelling back at her. Because that's the only chance I had to survive. And she says, and so after a while it got so comical because we both were yelling at each other about nothing, you know. And the first thing you know, we started laughing. Now this is when my house turned to a home, is when we started laughing. And when I started giving her the right to her opinions, and she started giving me the right to my opinions. Well, the kids heard all of this, and they wanted to be on in the fun too, you know. And so they started expressing their opinions, and they started laughing. And the first thing you know, the whole complete atmosphere of our home changed. You know, that's a fantastic thing. This doctor was the best friend I ever had. Now, Al-Anon does all that today, I assume. They do a lot of it. But Rena and I had to learn this the hard way. And today, we love each other more. After 47 years of marriage, we love each other more today than we did the day we got married by far. And we spent 30 years building a business together. And finally, our son took it over. And today, she works for my son for no pay. I don't know why she goes down there and works for him, but she does. She became my controller. She controlled the money, and I made the money, you know. I don't worry about it. And so today she does the same thing for my son. Completely happy. She wouldn't think about not going to that darn store every day and work. She just wouldn't think about it. She couldn't live otherwise. Well, I don't do nothing. I'm one of them retired boys. I'm tired. You know, I worked long enough, so I quit. And this is all the work I do, just AA work. That's the only thing I do. But we've had a joyous life since we turned our house into a home. So I gave her the right to her opinion, and she gave me the right to mine. And today, you might think that we'll start talking, and we're just the opposite of daylight and dark. Absolutely. But we just have a wonderful relationship. Well, everything got along fine. I want to tell you about one other thing now, and then be time. I want to talk to you about God. I think that's important. Very important. I was reared, and like all good alcoholics, in a Christian home. My mother taught me everything she was supposed to teach me. And of course, when I started drinking, well, all that went out the window. And so for the first 5 years in AA, I didn't pay much attention to the God business. For the simple reason I thought I could do without it. And I left God alone, and God left me alone. But as I started getting things really cleaned up and my mind started opening up, and I was listening better about what people had to say from the podium, I found out that every person that I respected in Alcoholics Anonymous for their program, and I would like to have what they had, they all talked about God. and they just talked about God freely, unashamed. And after a period of time, I came to a decision that maybe it was something to this God business. Maybe I'm missing something, because I still had this football in my stomach. I had never taken the third step. And so, or I never had taken the second, you might say, because I never came to believe that a power greater than myself to restore me to sanity till I decided that he could restore me to sanity. And so it was a black-headed gal in my group that just was the epitome of the program, and I decided I'd go out and talk to her about this God business, see if she could straighten it out for me. So I walks out and knocks at the door, and she came to the door, and she says, "Wesley, come on in." Says, "I'm baking a cake. Go in the living room, sit down. I'll be right there." And so I went in the living room and sat down, and in a rocking chair. And when I leaned back, my eyes went to the wall, and there was a picture. And it was a picture of a sailor standing at the wheel of a ship, and all around this ship was a very rough sea. And this young man fascinated me because he didn't have a trace of fear in his face. Not one trace of fear. And I'd rode out 3 typhoons in the China Seas, and I know what a rough sea is, and I know everybody aboard ship is full of fear. I know this. But he had no fear. This artist painted no fear in this boy's face. And I kept looking at the picture, and finally I realized that the Prince of Peace was painted in silhouette right behind this young man. He had his hand on his shoulder, and he was pointing away. And I said to myself, you know, this young man has got a friend. He's got a friend. And my mind went back to the first day I was in AA. I didn't have one friend because, as I told you a few minutes ago, I didn't want a friend because everybody was taking my inventory. Everybody was talking to me about my drinking, trying to take away from me the rights and privileges to drink alcohol. And I turned my back on everybody until I came in touch with Alcoholics Anonymous. In Alcoholics Anonymous membership, no one criticized me. No one cared who I was or what I was. The only thing they was interested in, did I have a desire to stop drinking? And they didn't criticize me about my drinking. They told me about their drinking. And they let me identify with them. And so I would listen to them, and finally I said to the man that was talking to me, I said, well, if that's the way you are, that's the way I am too, so I must be one of them things. I must be an alcoholic. And I developed friendships this way through communication. You see, all communication is the start of all understanding. If you want to understand anything, you have to communicate with it. I don't care what it is on this earth. You have to communicate. And so my mind went back to this picture, and I said, this young man has communicated with the Prince of Peace. And I never talked to the woman when I came to talk to her about. I left in a few minutes after saying good morning, and I went back to my place of business, and I got me a wooden box about half size of this podium and sat in this little town delivery truck that I was driving. It had one bucket seat in it, and that was for the Prince of Peace. And as I rode around to my electoral jobs, I talked to the Prince of Peace just like I've been talking to you. And finally, I started talking to him about the nitty-gritty of alcoholism, the insanity of alcoholism, the guilt that I had, of the things that I had done under the state of insanity, due directly from the cause of alcohol, that I was so deathly ashamed of and felt so black inside about, that I just could not forgive myself for it, and I've done some awful things. And he used to say to me, he says, Wesley, you don't live that way anymore. You're a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Why don't you live the program? Why don't you live today? I says, I did it, and I feel ashamed about it. He says, well, you know, yesterday's a council check, tomorrow's a promissory note, today is cash. Spend the cash and forget about these council checks. He says, you wouldn't try to redeposit a council check, would you? And I said, if I'd have thought about it, I'd tried it. And he says, and he talked to me like that. And I couldn't understand what he was trying to tell me. And one night I was at an AA meeting under protest. But I was ready. You see, when the pupil is ready, the teacher will appear in this program. Don't you ever worry about that. When you are ready to take 1 foot farther down that path, the teacher will appear. Don't ever worry about that. You'll come in contact with the right person if you are sincere. And if you have that desire And this woman said this little simple thing. She says, you know, the greatest thing on earth is to learn to forgive others. But the greatest of greatest things on earth is to learn to forgive yourself. And I said, my God, that's my hang-up. I am not living the AA program. What I am bothered about every day of my life and cutting out the sunlight of the Spirit is my guilt of what I've done under the influence of alcohol. Something that I did yesterday. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't drink anymore, and I don't live like that anymore. And if I'm going to live the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I can't live in yesterday. How many of y'all do agree with that? You can't live in yesterday. And so therefore, if you don't forgive yourself of what you've done under the insanity of alcohol, you're not living the AA program. Wesley, talking to me now. And in a very few days, I didn't regret a drink I ever took. I didn't regret a dime I ever spent on it. I regret the heartaches that I caused my loved ones, yes, but if that's what it took, that's what it took. You see, if I had not been an alcoholic, I wouldn't have this beautiful program I got today. I wouldn't be happy. I wouldn't be in Houston, Texas tonight sharing with my fellow man, would I? I would have no business there, would I? The joy that I get out of just being an alcoholic. I've got friends by the thousands all over the world that I've met in Alcoholics Anonymous. I got a call from Australia the other night asking me to come to Australia to speak at one of their conventions, and I'm too old for that. I can't do that no more. And I turned it over to one of my boys I sponsor, and he's going. You know, this is joy. Joy. I've become the part of the universe because I'm an alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic. You know, I have never been criticized for being a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I have never had anybody come up to me in Pompano Beach and slap me on the back and says, Wesley, I'm sure glad to see you all wall-eyed and loop-legged. Has anybody in here ever been congratulated for being drunk? I never have. But I've had thousands of people come up to me since I've been a member of Alcoholics Anonymous and say, Wesley, you're doing a good job. We need more people like you in our community. That's the difference. I have joy in my heart tonight. Joy. That I'm part of the human race. And that I can be part of a human race as long as I love God and stay away from that first drink. It's just that way. So I came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. And I realized for me to complete this circle and to get this program into action in my life, I had to, and I made a decision to turn my life and my will over to the care of God as I understand Him. Telling God that my way was the wrong way. And if I was going to be happy and enjoy the fruits of this world, these things that He so graciously gave to each and every one of us, if I was going to enjoy them, I was going to have to do His will, not my will. And since that time, I've had a full life through the grace of God. I want to thank you for inviting me. Thank you.